When did your medical second opinion result in your doctor reporting you to Child Protective Services? The CPS investigator arrived at my door at 7:30 on a Friday morning, 3 days after I'd taken my daughter Lily to see a different pediatrician for a second opinion about her medication regimen. I was getting Lily ready for school when the doorbell rang. A woman in her 40s with a county ID badge introduced herself as Janet Simmons from Child Protective Services and said she needed to speak with me about concerns regarding my daughter's medical care. My stomach dropped. I asked what concerns. Janet said she'd received a report from Lily's primary physician, Dr. Trevor Keene, alleging medical neglect and possible abuse. She needed to see Lily immediately and inspect our home. I stood in my doorway, trying to process what was happening. Medical neglect. Abuse. All I'd done was get a second opinion because I was concerned about the number of medications Dr. Keene had prescribed for my 7-year-old daughter. That was responsible parenting, not neglect. I asked to see the report. Janet said she couldn't share specifics until after her investigation, but the allegations were serious enough to warrant immediate action. She asked again to come inside. I let her in because refusing would only make things worse. Lily was eating cereal in the kitchen, her blonde hair in pigtails, wearing her school uniform. She looked up when Janet and I walked in, her eyes going wide with the instinctive fear kids have when they sense adult tension. Janet smiled at her gently and asked if she could talk to Lily alone for a few minutes. I wanted to refuse, but I knew CPS had the authority to interview children without parental presence. I nodded and left the kitchen, standing in the hallway where I could hear but not be seen. Janet asked Lily about her health, her medications, whether she felt safe at home, whether I ever withheld food or medicine from her. Lily answered in a confused voice, saying she felt fine, that I always gave her medicine when she was supposed to take it, that she was happy at home. After 10 minutes, Janet came out and asked to tour the house. She inspected the bedrooms, bathrooms, kitchen, checking for safety hazards and signs of neglect or abuse. She looked in our refrigerator, checked that Lily had her own bed and clean clothes, examined the medications in our bathroom cabinet. Everything was normal, clean, well-maintained. I was a single father raising my daughter alone after my wife died 3 years ago. I worked from home as a software developer, which let me be present for Lily constantly. Our life was stable and loving. After completing her inspection, Janet sat down with me at the dining table and reviewed the allegations in Dr. Keene's report. According to him, I'd been refusing to follow his treatment plan for Lily's ADHD and anxiety, had stopped giving her prescribed medications without medical supervision, and had exhibited hostile behavior toward medical staff when questioned about my non-compliance. None of that was true. I'd never refused treatment or stopped medications without consulting doctors. I'd sought a second opinion because I was concerned about the side effects Lily was experiencing and wanted to explore alternative approaches. That was my right as a parent. Janet said she'd need to verify my claims by contacting Dr. Keene and reviewing Lily's medical records. In the meantime, she was opening a formal investigation. I'd be receiving paperwork within 48 hours outlining the allegations and the investigation process. She warned me not to interfere with Lily's medical care during the investigation and to document everything related to her health. After Janet left, I called my sister Claire, the only family I had nearby, explained what had just happened. Claire was furious on my behalf, saying Dr. Keene had no right to report me to CPS for seeking a second opinion. She asked what had prompted me to see another doctor in the first place. I explained that Lily had been diagnosed with ADHD and generalized anxiety disorder 6 months ago by Dr. Keene after I'd brought her in for behavioral concerns at school. She'd been having trouble focusing and had developed some nervous habits. Dr. Keene had prescribed Adderall for the ADHD and Zoloft for the anxiety, starting her on both medications immediately. Within 2 months, he'd increased both dosages twice, saying Lily's symptoms required more aggressive treatment. But instead of improving, Lily had gotten worse. She'd lost weight, complained of headaches, developed insomnia, and seemed withdrawn in ways she'd never been before. When I'd expressed concerns to Dr. Keene, he'd said these were normal adjustment periods and increased the Zoloft dosage again. By month 5, Lily was on 3 medications, the 2 originals plus clonidine for sleep problems that had developed after starting the other drugs. I'd started researching and found that Lily's symptoms matched the side effects of her medications more than the conditions they were supposed to treat. That's when I'd scheduled an appointment with Dr. Allison Porter, a pediatrician at a different practice, for an independent evaluation. Dr. Porter had reviewed Lily's complete medical history and medication list. Her assessment had been concerning. She'd said the medication regimen was extremely aggressive for a 7-year-old, especially for the severity of symptoms I'd described. She'd questioned whether Lily actually met diagnostic criteria for ADHD or whether her attention problems might have environmental causes. She'd been particularly concerned about the rapid dosage increases and the prescribing of additional medications to treat side effects of the original drugs. Dr. Porter had recommended gradually reducing the medications under medical supervision and trying behavioral interventions first. I'd been planning to schedule a follow-up with Dr. Keene to discuss transitioning to Dr. Porter's recommended approach. But before I could, CPS showed up at my door. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. Dr. Keene must have been notified somehow that I'd sought a second opinion and had preemptively reported me to CPS to undermine my credibility. Claire said that was insane, that doctors didn't weaponize child protective services against parents who questioned their judgment. But that was exactly what had happened. Over the next week, I cooperated fully with CPS investigation, providing copies of all medical records, documenting Lily's medication schedule, arranging for Janet to interview Lily's teachers and school counselor. Everyone confirmed that Lily was well cared for, that I was an attentive parent, that there were no signs of neglect or abuse. But Janet's investigation wasn't just about current care. She'd requested Lily's complete medical file from Dr. Keene's office, and when she reviewed it with me, I saw discrepancies that made my blood run cold. According to Dr. Keene's notes, I'd missed multiple scheduled appointments, had repeatedly refused recommended treatments, and had expressed hostility toward medical staff on several occasions. None of that was true. I'd attended every appointment, had followed every treatment recommendation until seeking the second opinion, and had never been hostile to anyone. Dr. Keene had falsified his medical records to support his CPS report. I contacted a family law attorney named Gregory Walsh, who specialized in CPS cases. Gregory reviewed everything, and his assessment was grim. CPS investigations could drag on for months, and even if I was eventually cleared, the investigation itself would remain on record and could affect future interactions with schools, doctors, and other institutions. The falsified medical records were concerning, but proving they were falsified would require expert testimony and potentially legal action against Dr. Keene, which would take time and money. Gregory said our immediate priority was getting the CPS investigation closed as quickly as possible. We needed to document everything showing I was a good parent and that Lily was healthy and well cared for. We also needed to address the medical records issue head-on. Gregory requested copies of all communications I'd had with Dr. Keene's office, including appointment confirmations, prescription records, and any written correspondence. I pulled up my email account and started going through messages from the past 6 months. Every appointment I'd supposedly missed had an appointment confirmation email with date and time. I'd kept these automatically in my inbox. I also had my work calendar, which logged my location and activity throughout each day, showing I'd been at Dr. Keene's office for appointments he claimed I'd missed. The prescription records showed something else interesting. Dr. Keene had prescribed increasingly high dosages of controlled substances to a 7-year-old, dosages that seemed excessive when I researched standard pediatric protocols. I compiled everything into a detailed timeline, comparing what Dr. Keene claimed in his records versus what actually happened, supported by emails, calendar entries, and prescription documentation. Gregory reviewed my documentation and said we had solid evidence the medical records were falsified, but we needed to understand why Dr. Keene would do this. Doctors didn't usually risk their licenses and reputations by fabricating records and filing false CPS reports over a patient seeking a second opinion. There had to be a larger motive. He suggested I research Dr. Keene's background, look for any history of complaints or disciplinary actions. I spent the next 2 days digging into Dr. Keene's professional history. He'd been practicing pediatric medicine for 15 years, had privileges at 3 local hospitals, and ran a busy private practice. His online reviews were mixed. Many parents praised his thoroughness and accessibility, but several recent reviews complained about him being too quick to prescribe medications or dismissive of parental concerns about side effects. I found a local parenting forum where someone had posted a year ago asking if anyone else had experienced Dr. Keene pushing medications aggressively. 3 parents had responded saying yes, that Dr. Keene had prescribed multiple medications for their children and had become defensive when they questioned the necessity. One parent said they'd switched to a different doctor after Dr. Keene had threatened to report them for medical neglect when they asked about reducing dosages. The pattern was there, but I needed more concrete evidence. I contacted the parents from the forum using private messages, explaining my situation and asking if they'd be willing to share their experiences with Dr. Keene. 2 responded within hours. The first was a mother named Nicole Brennan, whose son had been prescribed ADHD medication by Dr. Keene at age 6. The dosage had been increased repeatedly over 8 months despite worsening side effects. When Nicole had sought a second opinion and tried to transition to a different doctor, Dr. Keene's office had reported her to CPS for medical neglect. She'd gone through a 3-month investigation before being cleared, but the stress had been devastating. The second parent was a father named Derek Temple, whose daughter had been prescribed anxiety medication by Dr. Keene. Derek described the same pattern of aggressive dosing, side effects being treated with additional medications, and hostility when he'd questioned the approach. Derek had ultimately switched doctors without incident, but he'd kept detailed records because something had felt wrong about how Dr. Keene practiced. Both parents agreed to provide statements to my attorney. Gregory was encouraged by finding other victims, but said we needed to understand the systemic issue. Why was Dr. Keene over-medicating children and retaliating against parents who questioned him? Gregory suggested we look at financial incentives. Pharmaceutical companies sometimes paid doctors for prescribing specific medications or participating in promotional activities. I researched physician payment databases that tracked money from pharmaceutical companies to doctors. Dr. Trevor Keene had received over $180,000 in payments from 3 pharmaceutical companies over the past 3 years. The payments were labeled as consulting fees and speaking engagements, but the timing aligned with increased prescriptions of those companies' ADHD and anxiety medications to pediatric patients. I cross-referenced the medications Lily had been prescribed. All three came from companies that had paid Dr. Keene. The pattern was clear. Dr. Keene was being financially incentivized to prescribe specific medications to children, and he was retaliating against parents who interfered with his profit stream by seeking second opinions or reducing medications. This wasn't just bad medical practice, it was systematic fraud. Gregory filed a complaint with the state medical board detailing Dr. Keene's pattern of overprescribing medications to children, his financial relationships with pharmaceutical companies, his falsification of medical records, and his retaliatory CPS reports against parents who questioned his treatment plans. The complaint included statements from me, Nicole, and Derek, along with documentation of the pharmaceutical payments and the discrepancies in medical records. The medical board opened an investigation within 2 weeks. They assigned an investigator named Thomas Rivera, who contacted me for an interview. I provided everything Gregory and I had compiled, walking Thomas through the timeline of Lily's treatment, the aggressive medication increases, the side effects, the second opinion, and the false CPS report that followed. Thomas said the medical board took complaints about pediatric overprescribing very seriously, especially when financial conflicts of interest were involved. He'd be interviewing other parents who'd been patients of Dr. Keene and reviewing prescription records from his practice. In the meantime, I should continue cooperating with CPS investigation and documenting Lily's care. The CPS investigation concluded 4 weeks after it opened. Janet Simmons issued a finding of unfounded, meaning the allegations of medical neglect and abuse had no basis in evidence. She'd determined that I was providing appropriate care for Lily, that the medical records Dr. Keene had submitted contained inaccuracies that I'd successfully refuted with documentation, and that seeking a second opinion was a reasonable parental decision, not evidence of neglect. The case was closed and sealed. I was relieved but angry. A month of my life and Lily's life had been disrupted by a false accusation. Lily had been interviewed by CPS, had her privacy invaded, had experienced the stress of knowing something was wrong, even if she didn't fully understand what. And all because a doctor had decided to retaliate against me for questioning his treatment plan. Janet told me I could file a complaint against Dr. Keene for making a false report, but she warned that such complaints rarely led to consequences. CPS was required to investigate every report they received, even ones that seemed questionable. Doctors had immunity for reporting in good faith. Proving bad faith was difficult, but I didn't need to prove bad faith to CPS. The medical board investigation was uncovering something much larger. Thomas Rivera called 6 weeks after I'd filed the complaint. The medical board had interviewed 15 families who'd been patients of Dr. Keene over the past 3 years. A clear pattern had emerged. Dr. Keene routinely diagnosed children with ADHD and anxiety disorders after brief evaluations, prescribed multiple medications from companies that paid him consulting fees, increased dosages aggressively despite side effects, and became hostile toward parents who questioned his approach. At least 4 other families had been reported to CPS after seeking second opinions or trying to reduce their children's medications. The medical board had also examined Dr. Keene's prescription records and found that he prescribed ADHD and anxiety medications to pediatric patients at rates significantly higher than peer physicians, and that nearly all prescriptions were for brands manufactured by the 3 companies paying him. Thomas said they had enough evidence to bring formal charges against Dr. Keene for unprofessional conduct, specifically for prescribing medications without adequate diagnostic basis, failing to disclose financial conflicts of interest, falsifying medical records, and making retaliatory reports to Child Protective Services. The medical board scheduled a formal hearing for 3 months out. Meanwhile, I'd transitioned Lily to Dr. Porter's care, and we'd begun gradually reducing her medications under close medical supervision. The transformation was remarkable. As the drugs left her system, Lily became more herself again. She started sleeping normally, regained the weight she'd lost, stopped having headaches, and her personality brightened. Dr. Porter had been right. Lily's original symptoms had been mild and environmentally driven, largely related to adjusting to a new school after we'd moved following my wife's death. With therapy and some behavioral strategies, Lily's focus and anxiety improved dramatically without medication. By the time the medical board hearing arrived, Lily was off all medications and thriving. The hearing was held in a conference room at the state medical board offices. Dr. Keene attended with his attorney, a man named Philip Cross, who specialized in defending physicians against licensing complaints. The medical board panel consisted of 3 physicians and 2 public members, all of whom had reviewed the evidence beforehand. Thomas Rivera presented the case methodically, introducing records showing Dr. Keene's prescribing patterns, the pharmaceutical company payments, and testimonies from multiple families describing identical experiences. He showed Lily's medical records with the falsified entries alongside my documentation proving the entries were false. He played a recording of a call between Dr. Keene's office and CPS making the neglect report, where the office staff member made claims about my behavior that were contradicted by appointment records and witness statements. Nicole Brennan testified about her experience, describing how her son had been over-medicated and how she'd been reported to CPS when she questioned Dr. Keene. Derek Temple testified about the pattern he'd observed. I testified last, explaining how seeking a second opinion had resulted in a false CPS report that could have destroyed my family. Dr. Keene's defense was that he'd been practicing medicine based on his clinical judgment, that the pharmaceutical payments were for legitimate consulting work unrelated to his prescribing decisions, and that his CPS reports had been made out of genuine concern for patient welfare. Philip Cross argued that parents often misunderstood medical treatment plans and that Dr. Keene had been trying to protect children from parental interference with necessary care. The medical board panel didn't appear convinced. During cross-examination, one of the physician panel members asked Dr. Keene to explain why he'd prescribed Adderall at doses above standard pediatric recommendations to multiple children under age 8. Dr. Keene claimed each case required individualized treatment. The panel member pointed out that individualized treatment should show variation in approach, but Dr. Keene's records showed nearly identical treatment patterns across dozens of patients. Another panel member asked about the falsified entries in my medical records. Dr. Keene claimed they were documentation errors made by office staff, but I'd brought copies of the appointment confirmation emails showing I'd attended appointments he claimed I'd missed. The panel deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the chair read their findings. Dr. Keene was found to have engaged in unprofessional conduct by prescribing controlled substances to pediatric patients without adequate diagnostic justification, by failing to properly monitor and adjust treatment plans in response to adverse effects, by falsifying medical records to support retaliatory CPS reports, and by violating ethical standards regarding disclosure of financial relationships with pharmaceutical companies. The sanctions were severe. Dr. Keene's medical license was suspended for 2 years, after which he could apply for reinstatement only after completing ethics training and submitting to practice monitoring. He was fined $75,000, required to refund fees to affected patients, and barred from accepting any payments from pharmaceutical companies in the future. The decision would be reported to national physician databases, effectively ending his ability to practice medicine in other states. Dr. Keene's face remained impassive as the sanctions were read, but Philip Cross immediately announced they'd be appealing the decision. The appeal process would take months, but the suspension was effective immediately. Dr. Keene would not be treating patients while the appeal was pending. As I left the hearing, several other parents approached me, thanking me for pursuing the complaint. Without my documentation and willingness to fight back, Dr. Keene would have continued harming children for years. But the medical board sanctions weren't the end. Gregory had filed a civil lawsuit against Dr. Keene on behalf of multiple families, seeking damages for medical malpractice, emotional distress, and the harm caused by false CPS reports. The lawsuit alleged that Dr. Keene had systematically over-medicated children for financial gain, had falsified records to cover his misconduct, and had weaponized child protective services against parents who interfered with his scheme. The pharmaceutical companies were also named in the lawsuit for their role in incentivizing inappropriate prescribing. The company's attorneys immediately moved to dismiss, arguing they had no control over physician prescribing decisions and that their payment programs were legal and properly disclosed. Gregory countered that the companies knew or should have known their payment programs were leading to overprescribing of powerful medications to children, and that they'd failed to monitor or stop Dr. Keene's behavior despite clear red flags in his prescription patterns. The lawsuit survived the motion to dismiss and moved into discovery. Gregory subpoenaed Dr. Keene's complete financial records, prescription data, patient files, and communications with pharmaceutical companies. What emerged during discovery was stunning. Dr. Keene had been participating in a pharmaceutical company program that paid bonuses based on prescription volume. The more he prescribed of specific medications, the larger his quarterly payments. He'd received over $300,000 total over 4 years, with payments increasing each year as his prescription volume grew. The pharmaceutical company had explicitly tracked his prescribing rates and had sent him congratulatory emails when he'd met volume targets. Internal company documents showed they'd identified Dr. Keene as a high-value prescriber and had assigned a sales representative to maintain a close relationship with him. When some of Dr. Keene's pediatric patients had experienced adverse effects, the sales rep had coached him on how to prescribe additional medications to manage side effects rather than reducing the original drugs. The companies had known they were incentivizing overprescribing to children and had actively facilitated it. Gregory amended the complaint to include fraud and conspiracy charges. The case gained media attention as reporters discovered the scope of what had happened. Local news outlets ran stories about the pediatrician who'd over-medicated dozens of children for profit and had retaliated against parents who questioned him by reporting them to CPS. The stories prompted even more families to come forward, some who'd switched doctors without realizing they'd been victims of a systematic scheme, others who'd endured CPS investigations after questioning Dr. Keene's treatment plans. The state attorney general's office opened a criminal investigation into Dr. Keene for insurance fraud. Every medication he'd prescribed had been billed to insurance companies, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in claims for unnecessary prescriptions. That constituted fraud under state and federal law. Additionally, his false CPS reports could constitute criminal filing of false reports, though prosecutors were still evaluating whether those charges could be proven beyond reasonable doubt. The pressure on Dr. Keene mounted from multiple directions. The medical board suspension, the civil lawsuit, the criminal investigation, and the public exposure combined to destroy his practice and reputation. His attorney approached Gregory about settlement discussions. The pharmaceutical companies also wanted to settle, eager to avoid a trial that would expose their payment practices to public scrutiny. Settlement negotiations took 4 months. Dr. Keene agreed to pay $2.4 million to be distributed among affected families, to surrender his medical license permanently, and to cooperate with ongoing criminal investigations. The pharmaceutical companies agreed to pay $15 million into a settlement fund to terminate their volume-based payment programs and to implement new monitoring systems to identify physicians with concerning prescribing patterns. My family's share of the settlement was $180,000, compensation for Lily's medical expenses, the harm caused by unnecessary medications, and the trauma of the false CPS investigation. Other families received similar amounts based on the severity of harm their children had experienced. Nicole Brennan's son had been on medications for over a year and had developed serious side effects. Her settlement was larger. Derek Temple's daughter had been on medications for a shorter period and had fewer complications. His settlement was smaller, but still significant. The criminal case against Dr. Keene proceeded separately. Prosecutors charged him with insurance fraud and filing false reports. The fraud charges carried potential prison time. Dr. Keene pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a sentence of 18 months in prison, followed by probation. He was also ordered to pay restitution to insurance companies for fraudulent claims. At his sentencing hearing, the judge addressed Dr. Keene directly, saying his abuse of the trust parents placed in physicians was unconscionable. He'd exploited vulnerable children for financial gain, had weaponized Child Protective Services to silence parents who advocated for their children's welfare, and had shown complete disregard for the harm he was causing. The judge said the sentence should serve as a message that physicians who prioritize profit over patient care would face serious consequences. I attended the sentencing with Lily, who was now 8 and medication-free. She didn't fully understand everything that had happened, but she knew the doctor who'd given her medicine that made her feel bad wouldn't be able to hurt other kids anymore. That was enough for her. The criminal case also led to broader reforms. The state legislature passed new laws requiring physicians to disclose pharmaceutical company payments to patients, limiting bonuses based on prescription volume, and creating protections for parents who sought second opinions. CPS was required to verify medical allegations with independent experts before opening investigations based solely on physician reports. 1 year after CPS had showed up at my door, I took Lily to a routine checkup with Dr. Porter. Lily was thriving in school, her anxiety and focus issues completely resolved through therapy and environmental changes. Dr. Porter reviewed Lily's progress and said she was proud of how I'd advocated for my daughter even when facing serious pressure to comply with harmful treatment. She said too many parents were intimidated by medical authority and didn't question recommendations even when something felt wrong. I'd trusted my instincts and saved Lily from years of unnecessary medication. The settlement money was in a trust fund for Lily's future education. I'd used some of it to pay legal fees and to donate to organizations that helped families navigate CPS investigations. I'd also become an advocate myself, speaking to parent groups about the importance of questioning medical recommendations that didn't make sense and about the warning signs of physicians who might be overprescribing for financial reasons. Other families from Dr. Keene's practice had formed a support group, helping each other process the trauma of having their children unnecessarily medicated and dealing with the aftermath of CPS investigations. We shared resources, referred families to ethical physicians, and lobbied for continued reforms to prevent similar abuse. The experience had changed how I viewed medical authority and institutional systems. I'd learned that doctors could abuse their power just as badly as anyone in a position of authority, and that systems meant to protect children could be weaponized against the very families they were supposed to help. 3 years after everything started, I received a letter from the state medical board. They were conducting a follow-up review of reforms implemented after the Keene case and wanted input from affected families. I provided a detailed response, praising the new disclosure requirements and the protections for parents seeking second opinions. I also recommended stronger oversight of physicians who prescribe controlled substances to children at high rates and more robust consequences for physicians who file false CPS reports. The board incorporated some of my recommendations into updated policies. Dr. Keene completed his prison sentence and was released on probation. His medical license remained permanently revoked. Last I heard, he was working in pharmaceutical sales, which seemed darkly appropriate. The pharmaceutical companies faced multiple lawsuits from families across the country after their payment practices were exposed in our case. They paid hundreds of millions in settlements and agreed to reform their marketing and payment programs. Some of the executives who designed the volume-based bonus programs faced their own criminal charges. The system had failed to protect children from a predator with a medical degree, but it had eventually delivered accountability, not because the system worked automatically, but because parents had fought back, gathered evidence, and refused to accept the word of an authority figure over their own observations of their children's suffering. Lily was 11 now and didn't remember much about the medications or the CPS investigation. She knew her dad had fought to protect her from a bad doctor, and that was enough. I'd kept all the documentation from the case, not as a reminder of trauma, but as evidence that fighting back against institutional abuse was possible. Parents facing similar situations reached out to me occasionally, asking for advice on how to challenge physician recommendations or respond to CPS investigations. I always told them the same thing. Trust your instincts about your child's welfare, document everything, and don't be afraid to question authority when something feels wrong. Sometimes being a good parent means standing up to systems that claim to know better, even when those systems have the power to destroy your life for daring to ask questions. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.